Hey guys, I'm your host Destin, introducing the first episode of Deaf to My Youth, a show heavily emphasizing the lack of direction with young adults after the culture shock of high school to adult life hits. The audience is by no means limited, as it builds a bridge between generations of varying understandings and perspectives that we never fully appreciate. I'm here to give you insight into the world from my eyes, as well as receive feedback from your experiences and how they relate. This episode will be named Wet Feet, as I've only dipped my toes into the cold water of adult life and experiences, as well as this podcast. Starting with some personal questions, what encouraged the podcast move? Now, the podcast was always something that I had in the back of my head, but really never had the full commitment towards of actually starting up. And now that I'm finally here, it's a lot easier to continue on with this. But what really got this ball moving was the unhappiness I felt with my life as it was going. And I'm only 18, so clearly something was wrong with that. So it was really something to counteract and be creative again, because if I'm not in school and I'm not working on like a 3D project or any type of assignment that I have to be creative for, I didn't feel forced enough, but at the same time my free time always felt eaten up by what I was doing at work or just the 9-to-5 life in general. It was super unmotivating. And so with the podcast, I was hoping to finally relieve some of that personal tension in my life, as well as provide perspective into a life that, most people would just see oh yeah, he's doing fine. He's just, waiting to do big moves. It's a little bit more complicated than that. And it just began a process of feeling stuck. And now another question would be, what makes me feel stuck? So when it comes to feeling stuck, it's more so of being in a rut of almost lack of direction in a sense. So I could move from going to this job that I'm at now to the Air Force, but it's such a guided path and there's so many possible options out there that when you look at them all, you see what other people do, you see how they make money, you see how they're living their lives, and that your life doesn't seem like it would ever go that direction. You almost mentally put yourself in that rut, or you make yourself feel stuck in that sense. And that's where I found myself at, because I was like, I really don't see how exactly this 9-to-5 making this much and this Air Force position and however many years I do that for, because if I do a whole 20 years, that's a while. It's a career, but that's a while of doing one thing. And I personally do not like doing one thing. I'm a huge multitasker, but it really had me feeling down about that. And the best way I found of getting out of that situation was to just change my environment. That sounds super easy, and it's really not. It sounds easy, but the actions behind it are not. So for me, the podcast is actually a part of getting out of this rut, because I'm able to voice myself, get my thoughts out there, have people listen to how I'm thinking right now, and be able to really respond to me on a more personal level, as well as my co-hosts, whenever they are on an episode, then they'll be able to do the exact same thing, because we're all going through the same thing. Because really, I never found myself liking to take traditional routes for most things, and maybe it's because, I don't want to feel like I'm living the exact same life somebody else did. Why can't I be different? And I think that's anybody's perspective on anything. They don't want to be what somebody else already was, in a previous lifetime, or following the tracks of someone to the T just because it worked for them. That in itself, it almost feels like you're playing somebody else's playbook to live your life, and I personally am not about that. And that's exactly why college was not for me. So traditional college experience, it's, you go on a campus, you have your classes, but most importantly, you're paying a lot of money. And everyone would expect from me, hey, why aren't you, in a college already? Or, you're really smart. Why didn't you pursue anything? I got a scholarship in the 5th grade. Why would you not do anything with that? It's not really about all the experience of, oh yeah, college parties, going to this class to finally get that degree. it's really a scary bet, because some people after college still end up with the 9 to 5 jobs I'm working now, and that's a scary thing to experience. I work with people that have good education, yet they're still in there with me digging trenches of dirt and sludge, and that's something that's a big risk. It's not a heavily common risk, but it's still there, and that's something that's it almost negates the feeling of wanting to jump into something like that. Classes in themselves don't scare me. I've done them for 12 years. I mean, I don't think it would scare most people. It's not a scary experience. It's more of an opportunity to further your learning, which I feel like no one should ever stop learning. But that's why this experience for me is really enriching, because I feel like I'm learning myself as well as educating other people about my situations and how they apply to my generation in general. Because a lot of people aren't going to college. They're finding other ways of going about life, and that's something that's interesting, and it works for some. It doesn't work for everyone, and I'll let you know how it works for me, because this might be just a whole running on experience, a whole podcast in general, because it is Death to My Youth. It's going to be a very interesting experience. But the biggest thing left to be desired on this transition into adult life is really just the understanding of principles that people already understand themselves. So that would be things like financing, credit, getting yourself prepped to be able to have high credit scores, be able to take out loans and do big things with financial freedoms that somebody at 18 wouldn't be able to just walk in and say, hey, I have this, because they don't really encourage or enforce really strongly the financial freedom aspect of economics. When you take the economics course in high school, they really only push the government side of things, learning how the structure is, learning how the market system works and things of that nature. But you never really get a full grasp unless you seek it yourself. And I think that's the problem with how people manage their money now. It's no one really has that full understanding because they don't teach the full understanding. If everybody knew how exactly to do this, there would really be no excuse of why things end up the way they do, why the market's the way it is. That's how I see it, because there's a lack of education in that department. People will spend money on just about anything and they'll feel okay with it, but when their financial situation reflects back on them, it's like, oh, why did I do that? And that's what I don't want to run into. I need to build credit, because credit is the next biggest thing. Of course, it's very ironic that we leave school with a bunch of numbers attached to our name, to a point that we're even numbers. We have school numbers. My number was 62191. I was just a number in the system. So what I'm really finding here is that credit is just another number-bound system, and the higher you have, the better you are off. Some people are gonna have starting off, they'll have really low numbers. You got to build it up over the years. That's something that is gonna be a project, and just as much as this podcast is gonna be a project. So we're starting off small. We're starting off with the real basics of getting out of high school and finding out what the path is for life. But I'm really excited, because this is going to be a good experience for not only just me, but for the people that listen in, and especially people in my own generation that can hear that they're not the only ones thinking the exact same thing. So, like I said, this is the Death to My Youth podcast. This was episode Wet Feet, episode 1 of season 1. We're going to be dropping this off in seasons, different topics surrounding the whole podcast in general, where we talk about different things as far as structures of, popular culture or anything of that sort, break it down into philosophical life things, or anything that really can be talked about on a deeper level. So, like I said, I'm your host, Destin, signing off. Thank you for listening.